Okay, hi everyone. My name is Rachel Ramirez, and I'm a journalist covering environmental justice, race, and climate change based in Brooklyn, New York. It's so exciting to be here with you both. And congratulations, Julie, for winning this award, and Maria as the main character of the film for always uplifting the voices of your community. So I want to turn it over to you both to introduce yourselves very briefly on your role in producing this film and being a part of it. And maybe we could start with Julie, the director.
Just realized I was muted. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, so I'm Julie Winokur, and I'm the director, producer of The Sacrifice Zone. I have a production company called Talking Eyes Media, and we produce all social justice documentary work, films, photo essays. We've been producing for several years now a project based in Newark that's called Newest Americans, looking at immigration and identity. And so that's actually how I first met Maria, was going on the Toxic Tour that you see in the film, as part of just getting to know different neighborhoods in Newark and really understanding more fully what was happening in each of the wards. And so as soon as I did that Toxic Tour, I became a roadblock for Maria. I was like, Maria, we got to tell this story. We're making a film. And she looked at me and she was like, yeah, right. So I'm thrilled that, actually honored that Maria stuck it out with me, because it's a fairly intrusive process to keep shadowing somebody and keep showing up and keep showing up. And, Maria, a debt of gratitude to you for allowing me along for the ride.
Yeah, and Maria, why don't you introduce yourself and the role that you play with ICC and the Ironbound community?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to Julie for making the film and getting our story out there. Yeah, I'm Maria Lopez-Nuñez, and I'm the Deputy Director of Organizing Advocacy, our Organizing Advocacy wing of the Ironbound Community Corps, which is, based in the Ironbound, which is a neighborhood in the city of Newark. What my job is really to keep an eye on things, right? Keep an eye on pollution, strategize our political strategy, our organizing strategy to make sure that what happens in politics at the municipal, state, and national level is connected to people on the ground, and that we're really pushing the solutions for a just transition from the ground up.
Right, and before diving right into the film, I want to start first with you, Maria. Why don't you walk me through how you got into this fight for environmental justice in the first place, and describe the makeup of and demographic of Ironbound, why it's called the Sacrifice Zone, or why you call it the Sacrifice Zone, and Doremus Avenue's chemical corridor, and how this issue really impacts you personally.
Yeah, and Julie's film does such a great job. I'm always like, oh, it's too much to really say in an introduction. But when you think about the concentration of pollution, and for us, the Ironbound is the whole 4 square miles that you see on that map in the film, right? And you think about us being surrounded, bound by the Passaic River, the longest Superfund site in the country. On the other side, for us to get to the other parts of the city, there's a rail um, line there, right? The Amtrak, which is really where people leaving New York City, they pass through that because Newark's one of the hubs to the rest of the country when you're leaving New York City, right? And so if you're leaving New York City, you're passing right by the Ironbound, which is servicing in a lot of ways that industrial megapolis, right? Metropolis that is New York City, right? So all the waste related industry, a lot of the waste related industry, for instance, our Passaic sewage waste treatment, it processes the waste of 5 million people. And that for me is why we're a sacrifice zone, right? Like we're being used to subsidize someone else's infrastructure. Our garbage incinerator is 40 to 50% New York City's trash. Like, why should we in the same neighborhood have to also breathe in what comes out of the sewer, what's burning out of a smokestack that's burning trash, with all the trucks coming out of a port? Like, that's what makes me feel like our lives are expendable, they're disposable, and especially with COVID, you're really seeing the exaggeration of our social inequalities, right? That
Mhm.
show how in neighborhoods like ours, there was disproportionate death, disproportionate infection rates. And that's not just based on the jobs we're doing. It's also based on the pre-existing health conditions that are no accident given the physical environment that we've been subjected to. So that's the sacrifice zone. And how did I get into it? Well, I always thought this was normal because I grew up in Bushwick before gentrification.
Mm-hmm.
Then I lived in, like I lived in another town that had really bad air pollution, and I came to Newark. Like it's always been the same story because people, of my background, of my racial and economic background, like we end up in the same neighborhoods. My colleague Melissa always says it. Like we have limited options about where we're going to be able to move and the type of social mobility that would get us out of this environmental injustice or the environmental violence that's enacted on our communities.
And I want to put a pin on, what you said about COVID-19 sort of exposing the disparities within your community. But I want to turn to Julie. I know you touched a little bit on how you came across this issue, but I want to know what drew you into documenting this community in particular, and how long and how did it all come together?
As Maria's alluding to, I'm one of those people who I only live a few miles away. I'm in New Jersey and I live about 5 miles from the Ironbound. And I've spent a lot of time in the Ironbound, but in the area that most people go to where they go to the restaurants. And what struck me after doing the toxic tour is that, all of us, unless you are directly exposed and live in that neighborhood or work, in the industrial zone, it's just the ignorance and like it just never crosses our minds that this is in our backyard. And I think people often talk about environmental justice as some issue that's going on somewhere else, and we talk about Cancer Alley in Louisiana, and we have something in our own backyards that we are actually perpetuating. And so just seeing it up close and feeling like this was a crime taking place on a daily basis in plain view, and that it's just really easy to not pay attention, drive past it, fly over it, just easy to ignore. And I felt that that wasn't acceptable, and sometimes, it's interesting to be a filmmaker. You get to be a storyteller, and I'm often profoundly frustrated because I wish I had the moxie to walk in Maria's shoes, but I don't. So that what I can do is at least document what she does and the life commitment that it takes to fight this fight, and use, what creative superpowers I have in order to make sure more people are aware. So not everybody has to go on the toxic tour, that you can see this film and you get it.
Yeah, I definitely, when I wrote the story about Maria and Covanta, and also kind of, seeing that parallel with Camden, New Jersey, I definitely based some of those visuals and with your film, just because it was during the pandemic in which I wrote the story. And so it was really helpful. And you're right, how it's definitely a common theme in the environmental justice landscape, where a community fights against this large industrial company like in Cancer Alley or within the chemical corridor. And now with the push for clean energy and reducing greenhouse gases, I think these companies are working to protect their brand identity as quote unquote polluters. And the Covanta Waste Incinerator is a facility that you, Maria, have been fighting head on for a while now. What was it like when you first interacted with Covanta executives, and how was that, conversation like?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I can't even recall what the first time is. I probably don't remember. But every time that we interact, and we never interact for good reasons. So our community is always like, we should be meeting with our corporate neighbors, right? Like that's a principle. But there's also exceptions to that principle, and it's when they're enacting violence that is insurmountable. You wouldn't meet on a regular case with your abuser, right? So we don't meet with I try not to meet with Covanta executives unless they are actually, for once, going to talk to us about changing their business model, because waste to energy, their green brand, that's just not the future. We're not going to keep burning trash in order to create electricity, which is still more expensive than coal plants, and it's more polluting than coal plants. It's just not the ways of the future. Like we have renewable energy that doesn't hurt anybody, like wind and solar, and so those are the only options that we really want to talk about in our neighborhood. And we also only want to talk about waste becoming about zero waste. Like the amount that we consume and throw out, like this is a finite planet, right? And I'm hopeful that everyone is realizing, but we need to change corporate behavior in order to reach those zero waste goals. It's not just about telling everyone to buy plastic bags. It's about changing laws that prohibit, because a lot of our waste is actually industrial and commercial waste. And it's something that we all often always just fly over. And that's the bulk of what's being burned at incinerators like Covanta. It's residential, it's industrial, it's commercial. So we need to clean up our act and not allow corporations like that to exist. But they want to have a conversation with us about band-aid solutions of, can we just sponsor a cleanup day at the river? That doesn't change the 24/7 assault on our lungs that then when we face something like COVID-19 makes us more likely to die. My mom's right now still in the hospital because we grew up around industry and she had a predispositions. And so when I think about my mother sitting in a hospital for 6 weeks, and I think about Covanta offering to meet with me to offer me, what's essentially a pacifier. They're not offering real solutions to the violence that they enact on our lungs and our communities.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. And I personally also had some problems with Covanta when writing my piece on Gris about this. And I remember having to triple fact check everything they said. Yet, when the story was published, I think I told you this, Maria, they've tried to like debunk everything that, that was written and what was said. But Julie, I'm really curious about your team's interview with Covanta and how those interactions were like. And was there perhaps anything that didn't make it into the film, a post conversation that happened? I'm really curious about that.
That's funny you should ask. So you see the scene in the film where Maria and Melissa and Joe go into a meeting with the Covanta representatives, and you can tell it's filmed from the hip. I did not have permission at the time to record. So I stood outside and, we just caught audio so that at least I wouldn't miss what was going on, because it was a rare opportunity that there was a face-to-face meeting. And some things were said in that meeting that could have been really incriminating. And so I reached out to Covanta to see if I could get access to go film at the facility. And I also feel as a journalist, it's my job to allow them to say their piece and to represent, their truth as they see it. Because also it would have been a thin film if you don't have that counterpoint. And so I reached out to them, and they were aware that I had recorded because they saw me filming at the end as they were leaving. And when they realized that I had caught on tape something really incriminating, they said, oh my God, if you want to come in here but did you record before? And we got in this whole conversation. I said, listen, I'm not trying to do a gotcha, because it was a gotcha kind of a soundbite that I had. It wasn't relevant per se to the bigger story. And I wasn't interested in doing just a gotcha. And so I said, listen, I'm happy to share with you what we're editing of the conversation I did record so that you're aware. And they were so relieved. They then also gave me permission to come in and film at the facility, for which I'm grateful, because I think it's profoundly impactful to see the mountain of garbage that's being disposed of. And I love that scene in particular because you decide for yourself if this is okay. You watch that scene, and every time I watch it, I feel a little sick in my gut. And to watch that fluffing process where they're using, the large claws to just sort of pick up and drop all of our crap, and there are mattresses and like all your garbage, and to see that it's all single stream going in there, and to really wrap your head around your part in creating that mountain of garbage. I think it gives you an awareness and a sensibility of what the whole story is about.
Right. And I also love the beginning of the clip where you gave the viewer sort of this full snapshot of, the industries and sort of polluting, causing infrastructure like the airport, heavy freight trucks, smokestacks, and how this all contributes to the legacy pollution that have choked communities like Ironbound for decades. And then I want to go back to what I pinned earlier on COVID. And Maria, can you speak to the historical legacy of injustice sort of, baked into the fabric of this community that made the state and city officials be like, this is a great spot for a sewage treatment plant or a waste incinerator, and how, COVID really exposed those disparities?
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole history lesson. So I won't do that. But obviously, there's legacies of redlining, right? Of neighborhoods that communities of color were allowed to live in. So we start there. I mean, we don't even have to start there. We can start before that, right? Of like removal of indigenous people in this country. Like the legacy can go on, and the deeper you look, the more upsetting it is. Just the amount of environmental violence that's been enacted on communities. So when it comes to the Ironbound, it's just, we didn't have zoning for a long time, and the Ironbound was a place for workers to service the industry, and it became permanent housing, right? Like we haven't in in our country, we haven't been intentional about the development in our cities. And then unfortunately, industry has picked the neighborhoods next to people with the least political power. We see, NIMBYism work sometimes, not in my backyard, and it's weird because we've been saying that in our backyard, but it has not been working. Right now, we're facing a sludge facility that's trying to get in on that whole toxic soup that would process the sludge of 430 tons a day, right?
Mhm.
Why do we need that? And why do we need that in our, disproportionately burdened neighborhood that is already a concentration? So I think we need to move away from industry being concentrated and on a deeper level, we need to move away from industry like that. Like, I think we are reaching a decision point as a society. Like, are we going to continue? Like, this is bad, but let's just move it over there, or are we going to say no? Let's stop processes in industry that are terribly toxic for both the humans that are employed there and the earth and their neighbors. Right? Like it shouldn't exist anywhere. These industry poison our water, our air, and our land. And
Mhm.
maybe it's time for us to have a right relationship with our earth and with each other.
Right. And watching the film, I had a lot of emotions watching the film. And Julie, I love that there's, that personal impact, the historical archives and impacts, the accountability aspect, and even the solutions aspect that Maria and ICC were sort of leading. What was your overall approach to putting the film together? And, what type of impact were you going for?
Um, so when I started the film, I mean, I really felt like the neighborhood is a time bomb, and I still feel that way. So I went in thinking that in the course of filming, something is going to blow, and dramatic arcs in films have that kind of crisis point. And the reality on the ground was that I felt like every day, every week, there was some new fight that Maria was chasing, because it's a small staff to deal with a massive problem. And so, she was, running and working in overdrive all the time to deal with, like earlier on in the film, it didn't make it into the film, but I ended up filming Maria when she got a whistleblower, had come to her and sent photos and videos of a toxic cleanup on a site that was supposed to be remediated. So I thought, that's it. There we go. We've got the kind of, the drama. That whistleblower subsequently went quiet, but
Was
not.
that sort of the call? Sorry to cut you off, but was
Yeah,
that the call in the beginning with
yeah.
Maria?
And I have a whole scene of going with Maria and her colleagues to the site to phone it in across the street from this facility. And I went back and filmed and watched the mound of dirt moving, piling up. And it was a lost battle. It wasn't a victory because the whistleblower went quiet and nothing was done. And someone from the DEP was when they went to inspect, the people on site had already been informed the DEP was coming. So, it was a window into the corruption that's taking place. But as a filmmaker, I have to say this is a ridiculously challenging film to make because it's a slow burn. It's like in environmental justice, we talk a lot about slow racism. It is this like plodding, nothing's changing quickly. And every week there's some new issue, as Maria said, now they've got this sludge factory that wants to come in. So I literally didn't know what the thread was. And we cut different iterations based on different lines of narrative I'd been following. There's a part of me that feels like I'm not done. Also, I feel like this is a film that it could be that we will revisit and dive deep again, because maybe this is the first installment of a true arc. And I also did quite a lot of filming around the environmental justice law that was signed just back in October, which was a huge breakthrough for the state of New Jersey. And thanks to the advocates who fought hard in the state, a law that took 12 years to get passed. And the law is tremendous because it's a cumulative impacts law, and it requires the Department of Environmental Protection to look at all of the facilities in a neighborhood before permitting new ones and renewing old permits. And so, again, I never thought in the course of filming that would be the thing that actually got to the goalpost. Who knew? It was the least likely of everything I was chasing. And Marie would call me up sometimes. She'd say, hey, there's a fire, over on Doremus Avenue. You might want to come. And it was like, I kept doing, I'd like drop everything and go run over just to see, is this it? Is this the bomb that goes off? And it's a matter of time. I would hope that the film can be a wake-up call so we don't have to go there.
I think one great visual that I wish made it into the film was the purple plume that happened in the middle of the pandemic. And I know that was that really caused sort of a buzz in the neighborhood. And I know, Maria, you can vouch for that. But, touching on that sort of solutions aspect in terms of legislation, but also the nature-based solutions that, Maria, you've been leading in the community. You talked about starving the incinerator. Walk me through how you plan your plans to make that happen, and that overall positive aspect that it would pose.
Yeah, well, one, we want to get the incinerator kicked out of the renewable energy portfolio, right? Like we subsidize. So I think about it as we're subsidizing our own death, right? Our own asthma, because we consider them tier two renewable energy, and that's just ridiculous. They should be operating on their own, not with a government subsidy. They should not be on welfare. Um, Another aspect is, of course, we want our community, and our community is actually really receptive to composting. So like, oh, let's put it, or even making it chicken food, right? Like everyone's always trying to drop us off salad for our chickens, of what they could eat. And it just astounds me the amount of organic waste that goes into our stream. And why does it do that? It's because we haven't created the systems, right? There's an incentive for companies like Covanta, because a lot of their contracts have put or pay. That means put trash into me or pay me, right? Where the municipality would have to pay them for not reaching its tonnage, like what it promised. And that to me is an injustice. It really takes away the incentive for a municipality to say, let's clean up our act, right? There's an incentive the other way, and most people aren't aware of it. So, I've been excited with Julie of talking to people that aren't aware that their trash comes here, and maybe they can figure it out. So the burden's also not just on our community. It's going to take all of us banding together of finding out, where does your trash go and who is it affecting, and not doing it as an individual, doing it as a collective, getting the municipality. Let's work on the next level of advocacy, which is getting our elected officials to be accountable and to come up with real solutions.
Yeah, and I think we're reaching the end of this conversation, but I want to tackle, with environmental justice sort of making its way at the center of this new administration's climate and economic agenda. I remember, Maria, last time we talked, it was featuring that environmental justice bill just in New Jersey alone. Now it's reached the national level. I want to ask you both what the next steps are, maybe starting with Maria, what's next in terms of, actions and strategies for ICC, and then Julie, maybe you can pick it up on how you're still planning to continue documenting what's been going on in the Ironbound.
I mean, it's always hard to say what's next. The neighborhood will tell me what's next. It's not something I decide. But obviously, there is an exciting opportunity with environmental justice being centered on the federal level, right? Our communities talk to each other. That's the beauty of the environmental justice movement, is no communities alone. We know that, our industrial polluters are polluting somewhere else and they're hurting someone else. And there's a lot of trans-local solidarity that then organizations like the Climate Justice Alliance that bring us together are able to really leverage that power for us to have an influence and impact on Washington. And then for us to be able to take the environmental justice bill passed on the city level. The city of Newark passed it first, and then it was escalated to the state level. And who would think that a neighborhood-based organization could have such impact that then is being replicated on the national level? And so obviously we want more of that, but then the sad reality is we have a lot more fighting ahead of us. And just the basic rights for our communities are not they're not a done deal. We have to fight for every inch of rights that we have. And so we'll continue those fights against people trying to overburden our neighborhood and hope that there is some light at the end of this tunnel.
And on my end, we're using the film to do a lot of that coalition building work. So we're using it in a very proactive way. We've been hosting screenings that are for environmental commissioners and educators, because we're able through the film to bring into the room people who are not already switched on, who are not already on team, Ironbound Community Corporation. They're people who have a stake, but they don't quite know yet what kind of stake or how they can get involved. So already in the last couple of months, we've seen just a phenomenal turnout for screenings, really robust discussions, and folks who are asking, how do we connect with the ICC? How do we, use this film to educate young people so that they, can really own their role moving forward and helping to develop future environmental justice leaders. So that already we're in early stages, but getting tremendous response from the film, doing a lot of impact work. And so, and I'm a firm believer that, a film gives you an excuse to convene people. It also does a heavy lift in telling a story that's complicated in a way that's digestible. And then, what we see in the discussions afterwards is that people are motivated, they're activated, and their immediate response is, what can I do? Who can I contact? How do I support? So that's been our strategy.
All right, and I want to thank you both for being here and for sharing, this talking about such a significant issue and such an important film that everyone should watch. And I want to thank our guests and also our panelists and for the Environmental Film Festival for having us here today.
Thank you.